Hello and welcome to Foreign Policy Focus. This is episode 106 and I am the show's host, Kyle. Foreign Policy Focus is the podcast where I update you on all the current events and happenings from around the world and dealing with U.S. foreign policy and even some of those policies that are taking place within the United States and the wars on the people of America. I also give analysis on these current events from a non-interventionist perspective. If you think you know somebody who might be interested in the podcast or you just really like it and you're excited to share, please go to one of the three places, libertarianinstitute.org or the page foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com or the Facebook page Kyle's Files and share the show from there. All those shares, I really do appreciate them and they do help the show to grow. I want to start off the day and kind of looking at something, and that is all these terror attacks that are occurring around the world in places other than Western countries, and kind of look, I guess, at how they're covered in the U.S. media and then what the importance of those attacks are. The first one and the big one, I believe, occurred in Somalia on Saturday or Sunday. I first read the stories on Sunday afternoon here, that there had been a major terror attack in the Somali capital of Mogadishu where two different suicide bombers attempted a coordinated attack to bomb a kind of compounded off area of Mogadishu that contains government buildings and UN buildings and, kind of Western-like country buildings. I guess the plan for the attack was for a smaller minivan to get very close to the gate and then detonate in order to allow a larger truck filled with 350 kilograms of military-grade explosives to drive through and then I guess get as far as possible before detonating, and this would, in theory, kill some number of either UN type or Somali government types. The man who apparently is behind this attack is actually not a member of al-Shabaab as initially suspected. It is a man from a Somali village. The man is actually an ex-Somali soldier and 5-year veteran of the Somali Army before deserting, I believe, about in 2015, and is from the same village where a recent what is labeled botched U.S. raid resulted in 10 dead civilians. Now, I did talk about this botched raid on the show some time ago and made a big deal out of it because what happened in this botched raid was 10 civilians ended up executed. Now, calling it a botched raid seems a very generous term for the army. I posted this story and somebody said, what does botched even mean anymore? And I said, well, we killed them accidentally on purpose or purposely on accidentally. Either way the government wants to say, they're basically just kind of trying to hide the fact that they're responsible for killing these civilians. Now, this story seems, I guess, so unbelievable that U.S. Special Operations Forces would be involved with a group of Somali forces and somehow 10 civilians wind up executed. I think in our minds as Americans, if these Somali, forces were about to commit a war crime, then the U.S. forces would just shot the Somali forces. That's us doing justice. Remember, we've gone into places like Libya and Somalia and other countries under kind of this foreign policy initiative called the Responsibility to Protect, meaning that we go there because we're trying to provide the security and stability in these countries that the people aren't able to provide for themselves. But in reality, what happens is some Somali soldiers want to kill some civilians and they tie them up and they shoot them, and the American guys, I guess, were nowhere to be found or let it happen. Maybe they tried to prevent it and couldn't and then left. I'm not sure, but there was at least some American involvement in this raid. It seems that this man was specifically motivated by this raid to carry out the attack, and that he, may have even had some coordination with other people who lived in this village to carry out the attack. So this is, of course, a classic case of blowback. Blowback is the CIA theory that whenever you carry out foreign actions overseas and you go around and you kill people, this is going to really, really, really anger some people, and some of those people are going to be really, really crazy. And they're going to fly planes into buildings or blow themselves up outside of compounds, killing 300 plus people. It's an absolute tragedy. And one of the worst things about it, I guess, is that it seems to me and all the people around me and all the TV I watch and everything is that nobody cares. It's always interesting that when terror attacks happens in the West, either what happened in Nice or in London or at the concert in, I believe, Paris, Of course, people are constantly upset by the threat and the quote unquote, nuttiness, Kim Jong-un displays towards South Korea and how we have to protect the South Koreans. But whenever something tragic happens in the Middle East, let's say a U.S. bomb kills a bunch of children in Raqqa, or a Saudi airstrike kills 20-something children in Yemen, and nobody in the West cares about it, everybody shrugs their shoulders and says, oh, well, so what? 10 civilians were executed there, but it sounds too terrible to believe that any Americans would actually be involved in that, and there's not much we really do about Somalis killing Somalis, so shrug your shoulders, dismiss the story. However, there's people it does matter to, and those are people, who live in the Muslim world. And just like somebody from Texas cares about people being shot by a Muslim in France, and then goes on to demand that Muslims are banned from the United States, there are definitely some people living in Tunisia or Morocco or Libya who are going to see U.S. bombs falling on people in Yemen, Afghanistan, and Iraq, and that is going to enrage them. And some of those people are going to be on kind of nut jobs, and they're going to be the kind of people that are going to do terrible things like blow up, 300 people. I think this case is a little different because it's so immediate and it happened so close to home. When people look at Osama bin Laden and his list of, reasons, I guess, or grievances against the United States for why he carried out 9/11, it doesn't make sense to some people because they say, well, bin Laden's Saudi, so what does he care about the people of Palestine, and why would he care about Israeli oppression? When that's not the way Osama bin Laden ever looked at it. I think all that area was probably pretty much Arabia, not Saudi Arabia, and the borders didn't mean a damn thing to him. And so I guess I just want to stress that it's important to remember that it does matter to someone. Just because the people in the West don't care about these attacks, they do matter to other people, but also that it's very important that we make it matter to the West, because eventually this blowback will come back to the United States and other Western countries. This Somali man had the means to attempt to bomb the UN embassy, and that was kind of the closest he was going to be able to get to attacking the West. However, somebody else may have more connections and it may, be able to get closer and closer to the United States. So anytime we're carrying out these botched raids and you look at a story in the news and it says 29 children have died in the last month because of Saudi Arabia bombs in Yemen, and, you think, well, that's kind of far away and that's a strange sounding place, and, where is it anyways? That to some people it's not a far away place and it's not a strange sounding place. It's, home, or their neighbor's home, or the people like them's home, and they want to protect the people like them. Talking about the situation in Yemen, we did have Saudi Arabia kill another 29 children, I believe, in August. Of course, Saudi Arabia continues to say, we're backing off, we're not killing children, we're promised, we're reforming our strikes, blah, 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 blah. But in reality, what's happening is it's all nonsense, and then it's passed off and blown over in the international community by countries like the United States and the United Kingdom, who are covering up for and hiding Saudi war crimes because it is enriching them, because their weapons companies are able to sell weapons to Saudi Arabia so they could drop more bombs on Yemen. The cholera outbreak in Yemen is completely out of control now. We're going to have up to 1 million cases by the end of the year, including 600,000 children. Because cholera kills through dehydration, the virus itself doesn't kill you, it just makes you diarrhea and vomit until you dehydrate and die. Children and elderly are, much more susceptible to this, and we're looking at 600,000. Unbelievable. I think this is going to be the worst cholera outbreak in history, and that 600,000 people dying. Again, you could look at the theme of, worst in history. Whenever it's hurricanes and we're talking about the worst in history, or wildfires and we're talking about the worst in history, boy, does that get a ton of news coverage. But when it's a Saudi-induced plague in Yemen, nobody cares. That, nobody wants to talk about, at least not in the West, nobody wants to talk about this idea that, we have all these poor Yemeni children dying and it's the worst crisis ever. But they're just, willing to turn a blind eye and let it happen because, to them, it's the people over there. To touch up on the last episode, which covered Trump's speech on the Iranian nuclear deal, I did have one important note, and that is that Iran's foreign minister said that Iran will not leave the nuclear deal if the United States leaves, so long as Europe stays in. I think this is pretty important and significant, and will be very interesting to see the geopolitics play out here as the United States attempts to, I guess, either court or strong arm its allies into also vacating the Iranian nuclear deal. when U.S. allies don't really care about Iran's ballistic missile program and they just want the energies and the open markets, and, they don't have neocons constantly fear-mongering them and know the Iran deal is a good deal and it's holding true. But they'll also have a lot of pressure from the United States to withdraw, because without Europe withdrawing, the United States withdrawing from the deal is relatively less important. While Iran really wants to be able to buy airplanes, and I'm really sure that Iran would love to be able to negotiate with both Boeing and Airbus to get the best price, they're going to be just as happy buying Airbus planes, because at least then they're getting planes, and they're going to love shipping off their natural gas to Germany and other European countries. Speaking of selling weapons to Saudi Arabia, we have the United States selling Saudi Arabia $70 million more weapons in the first 8 months of 2017 over 2016. This was something that Trump had talked about in his campaign, saying that he thought it was significant that the Saudis had given the Clintons so much money, yet the Clintons continued to sell Saudi Arabia weapons. However, when Trump became president, he just picked right up where Obama left off. Some news stories out of Catalonia. We have the two top leaders, not top leaders, but two leaders of the independence movement have been arrested. A Spanish jail declared that because they were under investigation for sedition, that they should be jailed. If you're looking for injustices around the world, look no further than Spain. These Western countries are always pretending like they have to use a magnifying glass to go find injustice in the Middle East, but when really on their own continent, here's an example of gross injustice going on: the beating of the voters in the Catalonian independence election, and now the blatant arresting and intimidation of Catalonia in an attempt to get the country not to attempt to secede and declare independence from Spain. Of course, there is the looming ultimatum, and that does expire this week, maybe Wednesday, maybe Thursday. I'll have to look. I know they extended it a day or something like that too, so these things always get messy, and sometimes the deadlines come and go, but talks are going on, so they ignore it and stuff like that. Spain has announced that they have a plan to seize, quote unquote, seize Catalonia if the Catalonians continue to move forward looking for independence. Seize sounds an awful lot like occupied to me, so it sounds like Spain is just going to pour in a bunch of troops and try to keep the Catalonians a part of Spain. Don't know what's going to happen here. It seems, like I said before, the mandate from the people is to secede, but at the same time, it seems like you're going to have an awful lot of backlash from Spain, and as a leader, that's not a comfortable position to be in. In the Philippine city of Marawi, it looks like we finally may have a resolution to the ongoing battle, I believe approaching 5 months now, where an ISIS-linked group of jihadist rebels took over the city and continued to hold the city as the Philippines army attempted to take it back. This resulted in house-to-house fightings and a lot of the same tactics that ISIS was using in the Middle Eastern cities of Mosul and Raqqa. We had the Philippines killing the two top remaining leaders of the group that was holding up there, and then we had Duterte eventually declaring victory in the city. In Syria, we have the Syrian Arab Army continuing to advance along the west side of the Euphrates River and have taken the key city of Mayadeen. This was one of the ISIS remaining strongholds really after what the United States has now kind of declared the fall of Raqqa. They say that the Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurdish-backed forces in Raqqa now control 90% of the city and are just carrying out mop-up operations against ISIS there. The Syrian Arab Army has also declared victory in Deir Ezzor city, saying they have completely driven out ISIS forces from that city. One of the most interesting parts of all these cities falling from ISIS, and that is the agreement struck by US-backed Syrian Democratic Forces with ISIS in Raqqa, where the Syrian Democratic Forces allowed 275 ISIS fighters as well as their family members, including some foreign fighters, to leave Raqqa City and I guess head to the Deir Ezzor Province of Syria. Interesting, because this is completely antithetical to the one thing we got from Trump's plan, which was he said that once we surround ISIS, they're stuck there and we're gonna kill them there, and that's not what happened here. We let them leave. This is also interesting because when Hezbollah and I believe the Syrian Arab Army made an agreement with ISIS allowing ISIS to leave from the Lebanon-Syria border and travel across Syria to the Deir Ezzor province, the United States carried out airstrikes against this convoy and attempted to prevent the convoy from making the trip. Another big story coming out of Syria is that we had an Israeli warplane carrying out bombing operations near Damascus. Of course, this isn't a huge deal and it happens pretty frequently. This time the Israeli plane, I guess, ventured into Syrian airspace and was fired upon by a Syrian surface-to-air missile launcher. I guess this really ticked off Israel, and I believe the last time this happened, Israel said if it happens again, it would go and blow up that air defense, and that's exactly what happened. It's interesting that people always, pretend like Israel's this poor defenseless country, but right now it's waging an aggressive war in Syria. And then when Syria attempts to defend itself, it blows up the Syrian defenses, and, the international community kind of wags its finger at Syria for it. So, I read an article doing some math on the Afghan war, and not including the war debt, the United States has spent $3.9 billion a month for the past 16 years. That's 192 months in Afghanistan. Imagine that. Imagine if the United States, every month for the past 16 years, had taken $3.9 billion and just went and dropped it in the desert in the middle of the Asia, just for the hell of it. How stupid everybody would think that is, but that's exactly what we're doing, but it's worse. Because not only are we wasting $3.9 billion, we're also having 12 American soldiers killed every month in Afghanistan. And so hopefully one day somebody will look at this situation right now like we would look at somebody who is making a sacrifice to the sun god, saying, well, how stupid were the Americans sending 12 of their children every month to go die in Afghanistan for absolutely no reason with $4 billion. But that's what's happening. The former president of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai, was talking about why the United States' new policy in Afghanistan would fail, basically giving the United States a warning that we really shouldn't be messing around with the geopolitics of India and Pakistan, and that's generally a bad idea. The last big news story of the day is, of course, Iraq, where we have the Iraqi army declaring war on the Peshmerga, saying that the Peshmerga invited the PKK fighters into Kirkuk. Of course, the Iraqi parliament had really been pushing the Iraqi prime minister to act about the Iraqi Kurds declaring independence. The militia of the Iraqi Kurds is the group, the Peshmerga, the PKK are fighters against the Turkish government who attempt to defend the Kurdish population of Turkey from the Turkish government. So, not quite sure if it's true that the PKK went into Kirkuk. The Peshmerga denied it, and historically it doesn't seem to be that close of a alliance between the PKK and the Peshmerga. The PKK is much more closely aligned with the YPG and Syrian Democratic Forces, the group fighting in Syria that has actually fought against the Peshmerga. The Iraqi government issued some warnings saying that, hey, we're going to roll in here and take the oil fields around Kirkuk, and then we're going to take the Kirkuk airport, and then we're going to take several strategic points within the city of Kirkuk. There was some fighting reported, but mostly the Peshmerga just withdrew from Kirkuk and allowed the Iraqi government to take all these positions. The United States at this time reported that the fighting was just a misunderstanding, and it seemed to say that the United States would not in any way stand up for the Peshmerga, which the United States has backed alongside backing the Iraqi army in the fight against ISIS. It's interesting to note that the Iraqi Kurds, the Peshmerga forces, had taken a lot of territory, including a lot of oil-rich territory around Kirkuk and northern Afghanistan, all the way from Erbil to Mount Sinjar, in order to keep that territory from falling into the hands of ISIS or taking that territory directly from ISIS. I think in some sense, some of the Kurdish fighters felt like they had earned the territory, and in cities like Kirkuk, the Kurdish population had tried very hard to resettle and make that a majority Kurdish city and make Kirkuk, kind of a new Kurdish city. It doesn't look like that's gonna happen because, like I said, the Peshmerga left and thousands of Kurds fled the city as the Iraqi army moved in. Looking at the traffic jams, they're absolutely unbelievable. It looks like the Kurdish leadership reached a deal with Baghdad and the Iraqi government that they would return to the 03 borders. It doesn't look like they were even given their own state in exchange for giving up all the territory for all these years that they've held from ISIS. The Peshmerga have fought several battles against ISIS and did a lot of very hard work preventing ISIS fighters from fleeing north from the city of Mosul and then holding off several ISIS attacks against the city of Kirkuk itself. And it almost seems unbelievable. A lot of people are portraying this as the US stabbing the Kurds in the back. Some people are blaming the quote-unquote Iranian influence on the Baghdad government for doing this, saying that Iran, I guess, hates the Kurds so bad that they made the Iraqis hate the Kurds. I hadn't read any real evidence or suggestion that Iran was pushing Iraq to take some of this territory from the Kurds by force. In fact, if you look at any other country in the region that has a bigger hatred for the Kurds, it would be Turkey, who had shut off their airspace and their border from the Iraqi Kurds. So I'm sure this story will develop, and I'll have more about it in the days to come for y'all to hear, and just wondering if the Kurds will ever fight to defend their territory. It looks like if the United States will pick a side, it won't be the Kurdish side, and that they would continue to fight and support the Iraqi government, but who really knows at this point what's going to happen? Donald Trump is in charge. Alright, that's where I'll wrap up the show for today with a very ominous statement. I hope you all enjoyed it. The website is foreignpolicyfocus.libsyn.com, thelibertarianinstitute.org, or the Facebook page Kyle's Files. My Twitter is @KYAAALE. My personal website is kylesfilesblog.com. Post a daily news roundup there with all the news stories that you need to read to stay informed about the foreign policy issues.